If you take the rudder off a sailing boat, you can't control where it goes. But if you put the rudder on and you say, I'm the captain of this ship, then all these brainwashing technologies just become crosswinds, but you just tack against them to arrive at your destination. We all need Earth. We need to protect the planet. We have to take care of the Earth. We got to stop poisoning. It feeds us. We've got to get together collectively and make it illegal to use any technologies or any chemicals or anything that damages the infrastructure of nature upon which we live. And we've got to get over this idea that human beings control nature. And so if we don't get together and say, okay, no matter what color you are, no matter what religion you are, no matter what belief system you are, we've got to team together and remove any corporation or group of people from the ability to damage the infrastructure of life, because nothing else matters. So we've got a choice. Dream big together and protect what's essential to life for all living things, or die together. Dream big or die big. That's where we're at.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Paul Chek, welcome back to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming back
Cheers.
on the show.
Cheers.
Well,
little tobacco and herb for you.
Awesome. Well, the last episode went down a storm with the audience, so this one's going to be a lot deeper, so I'm sure they're going to love this one even more.
All right. Take me deep, baby.
So today's episode is entitled Under the Veil of Deception with Paul Chek.
Yeah, good title.
So in 2002, Paul Chek released a book called Under the Veil of Deception, where he outlined the deception created around our food supply and how it become an extremely unhealthy but also very profitable industry, not just for the food giants, but also the chemical and pharmaceutical industries. It was during the time Paul released the book in the early 2000s, especially following 9/11, that I began to see the worldwide deception that we're all indoctrinated into. Under the Veil of Deception was one of the first of many rabbit holes that I went down over the following decades, which made me realize that the world paradigm I'd grown up in was a false one. Like everyone else I knew, I had been deceived. Now, in this episode, I'll be asking Paul about the deception by the food and farming industries, and we'll also ask his views on the deceptions carried out over the last 3 years, why and how the deceptions were so successful, and what the solutions are moving forward so we can reclaim our freedom of choice, real education, scientific debate, and be able to make optimal choices to improve and maintain our health. If you're unfamiliar with Paul Chek and his background, I invite you to listen to episode 11 of this podcast, where you can listen to our whistle-stop tour of Paul's background, going all the way back to the early 1960s and right up to today, highlighting his concept of the 4-doctor coaching model for optimal health and performance. So, Paul, to kick things off, would you share with the audience your motivation for writing the book Under the Veil of Deception all the way back in the early 2000s?
Well, I was doing research to write my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And, I'd been researching these things for my whole career. So I already had a whole library of books that I'd studied going all the way back to, the 1800s. Harvey Levenstein has 2 amazing books, Revolution at the Table and Paradox of Plenty. I think Revolution at the Table starts at 1840, and then it talks about how everything that people were told to eat, taught to eat, changed and was manipulated by corporations. Mm-hmm. And Paradox of Plenty was a really shocking book because it showed how we have this massive, massive surplus of things like grains, and that while we have lots of food, he talked, for example, about during the First and Second World War, but what really struck me was the Second World War, how when they had bread lines and people were being told there was massive food shortages, that the government was lying to everybody. And he unveiled something that sickened me to my core. He said that approximately 6 billion beef cattle and pigs were essentially slaughtered and dumped into rivers because the farmers could not sell them, because the U.S. government did not want the farmers they didn't want to subsidize the farmers, and they didn't want to give them the right or the ability to give the meat to people, because the government felt it would make them too subservient to handouts. Therefore, they forced the people to struggle through the illusion of a food shortage. But the fact was they were wasting billions of dollars of food, and not only that, sacrificing the lives of animals in a very, very immoral and unethical way. And so those two books were shocking, because it showed that this manipulation by government and corporations has been going on for a very long time, and in very, very ruthless, disgusting, immoral ways. Another book that was a real shocker is Farmers of 40 Centuries by Professor Hollis King, who was sent by the United States government because they couldn't figure out, the U.S. Department of Agriculture could not figure out how in the world China, Korea, and Japan specifically, but in the biggest case, China, because only 14% of China's land mass is arable or farmable land. And so they wanted to know how in the world they could feed such a massive population on such a small amount of land. And the Chinese farmers were considered antiquated, laughed at, and belittled by American farmers. So Dr. King went on an expedition specifically as an investigator for the U.S. government to find out what in the world were they doing to farm that way. And he explored these countries I mentioned. And when he got to China, all of them had very, very advanced organic farming techniques. They were doing things like collecting everybody's poop. And in the village, there would be a mountain of poop that was called midnight soil, and then the farming families could all come and get that and use it as fertilizer. So they had a very careful system of reusing everything, not wasting things. They had, he has pictures in his book, for example. They would have drainage ditches, irrigation ditches for water, and they would have a little wooden thing where it was like a circle, like a Ferris wheel of like little scoops that they would stand on and run like a bicycle, and that would pump water out that would then go into the watering corrugations, so the water would flow to the plants. And it looked very antiquated to Western, mechanical farmers with tractors and things like that, and more advanced technology. I don't know, I don't remember exactly when tractors were initiated in the scope of that process. But the punchline is that he showed something so shocking that even the U.S. Department of Agriculture was shocked by it. He showed that the average Chinese, Korean, or Japanese farmer could produce more food on 1 2/3 of an acre than the average American farmer could produce on 40 acres, which the American farmer said was too small for a single family. So he showed that not only were they far, far, far more masterful at farming than we were, but they produced a massive increase in the amount of food, the quality of food, the nutritional density of food. And he also highlighted in that book something very disturbing. And he in paraphrase said, why are we spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on a defense budget when we should be investing in the infrastructure, in the farming systems, and in education systems, and cross-pollination and learning from each other instead of constantly trying to destroy each other? And so he actually saw that the community relationships and how they supported each other, and they're sticking to the basics and recycling and creating a sustainable farming system was really ultimately what he felt we needed in the early 1900s. And was warning that the corporate influences and chemical company influences and all these other influences were actually destroying the entire food farming and food production system. And, the sad thing for me reading that is that was that book's, probably 300 pages or so, loaded with great pictures, but it was a document specifically made for the United States government. And it's clear that they buried it. They didn't pay attention to any of it. And not only did they not listen, but they continued to this very day to degenerate the entire farming system and food system and turn it into a for-profit warfare machine, industrialized chemical destruction of the topsoil of our planet, of the food supply, and ultimately of the health of families, societies, culture, and nations. And it's so bad now that I don't even have words to describe it, except it's a miracle that we are still alive and that we haven't wiped out the sex organs of Mother Nature, which, as you know, is the insect population. But just to highlight how dangerously close, I think 2 years ago now, a study was put out by a team of 50 entomologists because they started noticing that bug traffic all over the world was drastically reduced. So they wondered what was happening. So they did a collaborative study with entomologists all over the world, and they looked at bug traffic based on their records and research for the last 50 years. And they found that in the last 50 years, bug traffic worldwide has reduced by 75%, which was largely tracked back to the use of pesticides. And so the title of the paper was something like Armageddon May Be Near, because the insects are the sex organs, the pollinators of the planet. And once you reach a critically low level, then you have no food anymore. Nothing reproduces. In line with that, Steiner in the late 1800s, early 1900s said, human life as we know it depends on two things, bees and trees, and if either of them reach a critically low level, life as we know it will cease to exist. And here we are right now with a major worldwide crisis of an extreme loss of trees and bees. The bee populations are dying out. Many varieties of bees, something like 60 or 70 different varieties of bees, if I remember right. I'm not being technically accurate, but a lot of varieties of bees have gone extinct. Honeybees are on their way out. And they've tracked that back to two things, electromagnetic pollution and pesticides. And another factor that I've identified is that there's so much light at night that the insects, like the bees, are having a very hard time resting because their hormonal systems, like ours, are regulated by the sun. And you go on Google and search for pictures of the Earth at night taken by satellites, and it's glowing with lights everywhere. I mean, the place just is never dark anymore. So then I was researching the history of the drug industry, the history of the FDA, the history of the medical industry, the Rockefeller organization, the Carnegie organization. I was looking into the food supply and found that 90% of all the food eaten in the world is controlled by 5 major corporations, Cargill probably being the leader of them. All their ties to the chemical manufacturing, to the drug manufacturing, to the medical industry. And what began to unfold when I started putting all the pieces together is that there is a long-term worldwide collaborative effort to destroy the planet, to dumb people down, to basically wipe people out and turn them into sick, highly profitable people that depend on drugs. And in concert with all that was a clear definite path, which is very well documented. If you look at DNA, Pirates of the Sacred Spiral by Len Horowitz, he documents that the Carnegie organization and the Rockefeller organization have been executing these plans and researching ways to control people through DNA and wireless manipulation for approximately 100 years, and are now at the point where they're initiating it successfully, which is what COVID was, is the indoctrination process with the new technology and the test for that, and also warfare silliness again. And so I just felt a moral obligation to humanity and to nature and to my students, because I teach, as you know, holistic lifestyle coaching. Like you can't do that if you don't know what the word holism or holistic means. And if you don't look at the world holistically or look at your own life holistically, then you're going to become dangerously blind in areas where you don't have the good fortune of being blind. Ignorance no longer is bliss. It's becomes a threat to your very survival and your consciousness and your intelligence. And so what I also have found is that the entire education system has been manipulated literally as a marketing plan and an indoctrination plan to teach people not to think constructively, not to ask questions, and literally to just be programmed robotic sheep, all of which just funnels money into the hands of the very people that turn out to be behind the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, and COVID. Mm-hmm. So the game hasn't stopped. It's just gotten bigger. And there's a long list of doctors, therapists, researchers, educators that have had their careers ruined and or been executed for putting out the kind of information I put in that book. Mm.
So that book was 21 years ago when it came out, which is crazy, because I think I bought it in 2004, I think, and it just seems like it was last year that I bought that book. And I guess, you know, you've obviously opened the eyes of thousands of people, and I'm just one of them over the years. But I guess we're in a situation now where, you know, we need to open the eyes of billions of people if, you know, we're going to come to a good ending, shall we say.
Fast.
Yeah.
We have to do it fast. And you know, in all honesty, you know, I'm definitely a pro-life and an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And having spent 39 years now working as a therapist, coach, life coach, dealing with people and behavioral change and seeing, you know, the issues that ail people and families and businesses and corporations and professional sports teams and society as a whole, you know very well. You're a very experienced therapist. You're an instructor for my institute because you're super skilled at what you do, and you've studied behavior change extensively. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look, you and I know it's hard to get a person just to get sugar out of their diet, but we're talking about having to make changes that are so radical compared to getting sugar out of your diet that it's on a whole dimensional shift of necessity.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, being a realist, I think we're going to have to go through a pretty good dose more of what we've been going through since COVID started, with, you know, watching farms get burned down, watching poultry farms being burnt down, watching the food being poisoned, watching parents being cut off from their children, watching parents lose their rights to the sovereignty of their children, watching people lose the sovereignty of their bodies to become part of the transhumanist bullshit agenda, turning people into profitable robots that they can tap into electronically and control their thoughts, feelings, emotions, spending habits, desires, where they can go, what they can do. I mean, literally, we're literally being ushered into an electronic prison. Mm-hmm. And the point I'm making, if it's not crystal clear, is that people are so asleep by design and so slow to wake up to what to people like you and I is dead obvious. And we saw that with COVID. We saw how many people with no thinking at all, and even famous people, you know, I won't mention names just to be polite, but people in the limelight that you never would have thought of would have fallen for that silly of a trick, bent over, and next thing you know, we're telling people to, from yogis to spiritual gurus to TV personalities to, you know, world leaders, the Dalai Lama, for God's sakes, got, you know, and that just broke my heart. I mean, I'm like, of all people who's got a real strong background in science, to use his power and his influence to mislead people to what we now know, what you and I knew from day one, is a complete and utter genocide movement and a complete attempt to control and steal life from human beings and steal their money and steal their resources and break the family down, the society down, the culture down, the nation down. And this is the implementing of essentially, you know, fifth generation warfare by what looks to be, at the surface, the Chinese government. But when you go deeper, it's actually the military, the secret military industrial complex, DARPA, Google, and the people that are often called the Illuminati, which is just a handful of royal families that are hidden in the background, pulling the strings on everybody, because they really have only self-interest at heart. That's the reality. So my point is, I've been waiting for people to finally wake up to the fact that they've been lied to, tricked, and had family members injured badly and killed, to start a legitimate revolution and be disciplined enough to starve these corporations out, whether that mean getting phones like freedom phones that they can't spy on you with, to only going to farmers that are taking care of the land for food and supporting farming, cutting off any of the chemical industries, not buying body care or self-care products that are full of toxins and largely the products of the oil industry and poisoning the hell out of people's body, to shutting government down and reestablishing government, to rebuilding the education system, to taking back the banking system and coming up with systems that are much better. And there's people that have the intelligence to do all of this. They just don't have enough people behind them to make the movement. So, you know, we're facing a real rite of passage into adulthood. We've been kept by design as subservient children to an elite few who have no morals. And so if we don't make it through and make the sacrifices to take the power out of these people's hands, our future is fated. It's fated, and we are going to be pigs in a factory farm, and that's putting it mildly, because we have a lot more cerebral cortex, therefore awareness of freedom and possibility and creativity. So the problem is, if you put a human being into a jail cell, it's actually a lot more stressful to them, because they know consciously what's happening, where animals are just confused as to why all of a sudden their savanna has shrunk so drastically. And they emotionally react to it, but they don't sit there and ponder what's really going on. But by the time people are locked up into this, like a lot of people are pondering what's really going on now with all the vaccine injuries and all the death and all the lies. But look at what it took them before they even started asking, well, what was in the... I mean, so, you know, the point in a nutshell is being a realist, I think that the rocky road of initiation into adulthood has just begun. And I think ultimately what's going to happen is going to split society and humanity into two camps. Those that pass the initiation and say, look, if I have to buy a farm, live on my own, and we band together in communities and serve each other, support each other, and take responsibility for our own power, our own water, our own food, and create our own barter systems, financial systems, legal systems, medical system that's really based on morality, the principles of morality and honesty and virtue. So you're going to have that camp. They're going to be the outliers. It's kind of like they're creating Hunger Games right in front of us. And so those of us that have the brains to know better will be living out in the comparative wild, and those that stay in cities will be locked in these smart cities, which is so dangerous that I could write 50 books on it. It's a complete abolishment of what it means to be human. It's a complete annihilation of our freedoms. It's something that we need to look at very carefully, because the very people that say they're doing this to save the world and to protect nature and to save humanity are the ones that have destroyed humanity, destroyed nature, destroyed our food supply, railroaded our education system, that thieve our money on a daily basis. I mean, the magnitude of the corruption and the fact that what we call government is actually an organized crime ring that is worldwide, that is dangerously successful to the point that they have secret organizations and police like FBI has been taken over from the inside. So, you know, we've got a real firewalk ahead of us. I think the beauty of it, though, is it takes an event like this to wake people up enough to realize that we have to come back together. We've gotten so pushed into this individual pursuit of money and fame and power and rank and attention getting, and you know, it's just to such an extreme that it's almost like rays of sunlight that forgot that they're all the children of one sun, in which there is only one sun. And so as they're shooting out into the universe to do their work of creativity, growth, and learning, they begin to battle with each other like there's not enough space or something. But if they just followed their own ray of individuality back, it leads to unity. And if we keep going on these individual vectors, we just get farther and farther from each other, but we need each other. No man can do anything, or woman, alone that's of any significance. Martin Luther King didn't create a movement by himself. Gandhi didn't rescue India from the British by himself. Steve Jobs didn't build the iPhone by himself. No one builds rockets by themselves. Cars aren't built by any one person. Nothing that we can do of any significance can be done alone. And we have now got the most significant challenge humans have ever faced, but we've got to stop this egoistic, self-oriented, childlike pursuit of self-aggrandizement at the expense of life and at the expense of nature and at the expense of each other. And Bill Gates, George Soros, Anthony Fauci, all the drug manufacturers, all the presidents, all the people in the FDA, with rare exceptions, are complete and utter examples, really, of what evil looks like when it's embodied in a human being. And if we don't get together and get clear on what our responsibility is, which is to starve them out, starting wars and being violent just puts us on the same footing as them. But getting together and working together to support each other and get clear on what's important together and protect the resources that we have, that's another thing. Bill Gates and these people in the World Economic Forum are selling off the commons. What is common to all of us. There's millions of acres of forest that shouldn't be owned by anybody. And they're selling off entire regions of the world to mining companies and to corporations to do whatever they want with. They're even, Bill Gates and crew are cataloging everything, even the fish in the ocean, the plants on the surface of the earth. They're trying to actually create a digital catalog of every single living resource on the planet so they can control it and sell it which means they're turning the whole world into the equivalent of private property with which you cannot enter. Where we used to go to parks to take our kids to have fun will now be closed off, just like if you were going to walk into somebody else's front yard and start playing volleyball, you'd get kicked out because you're trespassing. So basically, they're trying to make the world so owned that we are all trespassing on our own commons, and then use that to make trillions of dollars to use to invest in more spy technology to control us more further while making us pay for it all, including, I mean, the degree of ignorance, stupidity, and sheep herd mentality that it takes to allow something like COVID and successive events right up to now to happen is a measure of how dangerously inept our education system is and how far down the rabbit hole people have been taken with brainwashing and not thinking constructively and not being productive contributors and being railroaded into spending all their time, energy, and resources chasing after stuff that really doesn't have any added value to life. Who cares how cool your car is if you're eating crap food and funding the destruction of the planet? Who cares if you've got leather pants and a fancy house? Well, 50% of the species in nature have died in the last 50 years or less. I mean, when we start looking at what people actually pursue and put their energy into as though it was important versus what's really important, and then look at where that money goes and what it's creating versus what we need to create with our money, it's a suicide mission. It's just a suicide mission. And unfortunately, the gallows are greased and the blade is sharp.
Yeah.
Sorry to deliver such frank news, but, you know, I'm an ex-elite soldier. And one of the things you can never do when you're facing an enemy is bullshit your fellow soldiers, because that's guaranteed death for everyone. You know, when you're facing an enemy, you have to have 100% clarity and honesty, and you have to all be on the same mission and vision with the same values, or you become your own demise. You know, you just kill each other. And so if we don't get clear on what we all need together and what we're willing to do to support it and what sacrifices we're willing to make to protect our sovereignty and our children's future, well, then it's simple. You become an electronically controlled piglet who has no more individuality. And if you look at the agenda of the World Economic Forum and the desire to get rid of God and get rid of concepts like the soul, you're being forced into a level of materialism that I don't think people can even comprehend. I really don't. Literally, you're not even human anymore. You're owned. In fact, look at the fact that if you look at the patent applications and patent documents from the vaccine manufacturers, anyone that took an mRNA technically does not own themselves anymore, because their DNA is now infused with a patented technology, and the patents themselves say that you are now the technology of that corporation. So if you've been you've already actually, without realizing it, given away the rights to your own body, because you're not human anymore. You're not an individual. You now are augmented by patented technology that's owned by somebody else, that's proliferating through your body every second, replicating itself in all your cells and setting you up to be a remote control puppet by 5G, 6G, and all the crap they've got planned. I mean, it boggles my mind that I even have to be talking about this, because any parent should have taken it upon themselves immediately to investigate any of this. And the history of vaccines and manufacturers is like Jack the Ripper, right? People what are they paying attention to that's more important than what goes into their bodies and their families' bodies, especially when we've got a history of medical piracy and political piracy and financial piracy and educational piracy? I mean, you know, it's almost like the Stockholm syndrome, where people get to the point where they actually start to love their captors. And I think that's a very bad place to be.
Well, a really good example of that, Paul, was the guy who was Minister of Health in 2020. He went on a reality TV show over here recently. And all the viewers were just absolutely loving the guy and kept voting for him, you know. And now there's serious questions over some of the things that happened under his reign, particularly in the old people's homes. You know, it's believed that there was a drug called, they ordered 3 years, I think it's 2 or 3 years worth of that drug that they then used during an 8-week period in the spring of 2020 when lots of elderly people died.
Yeah.
Right. And that this guy is now some kind of celebrity.
Well, there you go. I mean, look at this. How do we vote Ronald Reagan in as a president, a movie actor who's never done any military time? Then we go Donald Trump, who is Ronald Reagan was at least a B actor. Trump was a C grade actor who's been bankrupt multiple times and has a long list of criminal activity. And people think he's the savior. I'm like, I mean, I won't go into all the details of what I've studied and what I've learned, but in a nutshell, he was in cahoots with the drug companies. You start researching 9/11, you see that was a government false flag operation run by the Bush administration and others. All this stuff, you know, you look into SARS. I mean, you know, Leonard Horowitz documents in DNA Pirates of the Sacred Spiral who's behind all this and what's been going on. And it's just, I think actually it's so shocking. Most people can't comprehend it, because it would be like finding out that your parents never loved you, always wanted to get rid of you, and maybe weren't even your parents to begin with. And to most people, the shock and the pain of that is such that they would rather just pretend it's not true so they don't have to deal with reality. And I think it's, honestly, it's the 11 hours, 50 minutes and 59 seconds for the reality check before the bell rings and the prison gates come down. And I'm not participating. I am full force, as you are and everyone we know, trying to educate people and wake people up, because I have extreme concerns for what my children, you know, I have a 3-year-old daughter, a boy who will be 7 this month, and a grandson that's 2, and my oldest son's 43, and he's got 4 boys. And, you know, any parent right now with even 2 brain cells holding hands must take the time to connect the dots and say, what are we bringing our children into? We're bringing our children into a completely toxic, completely corrupt, dying planet with problems so big that none of these children has a fighting chance in hell, because they are far more knowledgeable about Game Boy than they are about the mechanics of the soil and how life works. They're so completely detached from the reality of biological life that, you know, if Naval Harari gets his way, they're all going to, or Ray Kurzweil, they're all going to fall into the trap of thinking their soul can be uploaded to a cloud somewhere and that they can live multidimensionally and be free, which is just absolute silliness. I mean, it's just, you don't even want to start me on destroying that idea.
Paul, you mentioned earlier the word brainwashing. Now, as someone that served in the US military, you were trained in brainwashing techniques.
With them, not in them.
With them. And it's something that, you know, you cover in your PPS lesson 2 as well, isn't it, to a degree?
Yeah.
Can you explain your understanding of brainwashing and perhaps how that relates to what's happened in the last 3 years?
Well, there's many books that document the steps. The first stage is destroying a person's identity, whether it be an individual, a family, a group, a society, a culture. So the first thing you have to do is destroy their identity. That's what the masking was. As you know, it was a destroying of identity. And it's a technique that was used in Germany in the Second World War. It's been used in many countries. If you look at the documentary or the book called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, I believe it is, the documentary shows you exactly how they've been doing this over and over again using the same model. So first you break down the identity. You keep them in a constant state of fear and threat, and then you reward for conforming, and then you work on creating a new identity that is in a direct parallel with what you want to use these people for. So if you're a cult leader and you want to use them to assassinate people, then that's what you build them up to do and to believe is absolutely essential. So there's a series of steps that all were played out in COVID and are still being used right now. But in a nutshell, it's first destroy their identity, create so much stress and fear that the only way you can get a sense of relief or safety is by following the dictates of your captor, then succumbing to the creation of a new identity, even if it means you've got to kill your own family to maintain that identity. And that's part of the brainwashing. I mean, forever we were singing songs when I was a paratrooper that had, things like kill a commie for mommy, and to celebrate your victory, you'll make a necklace of their teeth. And I could sing all these songs that we used to sing in marching, but it's constantly droning in and driving in deeper and deeper into your nervous system and your emotions that you must eliminate these people. And the paradox is we don't know anything about these people. That's why I got out of the military. I refused to kill people without knowing the truth of why I was killing them. I can't trust that the government is honest. The more I investigated this, the more I realized how corrupt it was. And the more I realized that as a paratrooper, I was actually just the sharp edge of a sword to steal resources from people, whether it be oil, whether it be minerals. This is going on all the time. And so brainwashing is really a means by which you either force or coerce people into changing their identity into one that is controllable and conforms to an agenda that is not your own.
Isn't another thing repetition of a message from an authority figure? Isn't that also a tactic of brainwashing?
Yes, it's constant. It's a constant message. There's a very strong rank and hierarchy system in it. There's punishments for jumping rank. Like in the military, if I have a question, I have to go to the person that's one rank above me. But if I go to someone 2 ranks above me and ask that question, that's considered it's considered inappropriate behavior. It's punishable. And because the message gets filtered down on a need-to-know basis, because they know that the more you know, the more likely you are to wake up to the fact that you're doing something immoral, unethical, or illegal, and won't do it. So what they do is, not even the president has a clue what's going on most of the time, especially with regard to secret space programs and secret military programs. I mean, especially Biden. Biden has no memory anyhow.
Yeah, he doesn't know how to do his shoelaces up. So.
Right, yeah. So the hierarchy of control is really a protective means by which nobody can get the truth, so that they can never really evaluate if what they're doing is moral or ethical.
Mm. So you were saying they destroy their identity. Would you say that also preventing people from going to work to a degree broke down their identity?
Of course it did. It not only broke down their identity, it put them in tremendous fear and stress. I mean, imagine, having a $5,000 a month mortgage, a couple of kids, 3 kids, 2 cars, you got bills to pay, right? And, you know, there's a cost of living. And all of a sudden you're down to peanuts from the government, which is what they're trying to do. Really, you know, what they're trying to implement is the equivalent of a socialist or a communist agenda. And people that I know that came from socialist Germany, like Andreas Wecker, who I interviewed on my podcast, describes seeing what's going on over here is exactly what went on in Germany behind the wall, and warned that Americans are dangerously asleep. You got Vera Sharav on Children's Health Defense, who just released her documentary series and lived through the Holocaust. We've got Holocaust survivors that are saying this is not new. I've seen this before. So, anyhow, I forgot where we were going there, but that's what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I guess we saw in 2020 was, you know, on the mainstream news every evening telling us how many people had died, and it was just constant. So you got the fear factor and the repetition. Yeah. So you're fearing, you know, you're putting people into a state of fear that, well, if they don't do what they're told, they're going to die, or they're going to kill someone else if they don't do it.
Yeah. And the thing too is that then you have all the censorship, because the truth is a very dangerous thing for anyone to get a hold of when they're fighting an enemy that doesn't want you to have the truth. So the greater the degree of censorship, you know, the more coercion there is involved. I mean, honestly, like, forgive me if you're listening to this and you did get the... It's not my intention to hurt anybody, but I must say, who in their right mind would let someone vaccinate them with a vaccine that when you open the box to see what the ingredients and what the side effects are is completely blank? Right? I mean, people do more research to buy a toaster oven than they do to their children. And that just goes to show you how completely confused people are about, A, the realities of the world we live in and the corporate influences and the criminal influences, and B, how confused they are about the reality of the efficacy of most drugs and medicines, and how confused they are about their responsibility to protect life and their own life and their children's life. I mean, a good example is when I was in the hospital with Angie and she was giving birth to Mana. Among the constant pestering of us, because we would refuse to get Mana and Zoe, because we know too much, one of the nurses was heavily trying to sell me on signing off to give Mana a shot of vitamin K. And so I said, well, what's the vitamin K for? What's the necessity of that? She says, oh, it makes the blood coagulate, because infants' blood doesn't coagulate for X number of weeks or months, and they could bleed to death. I said, well, I got a question for you. How do we evolve for millions and years in nature without any vitamin K? And she had no answer. I said, second of all, is it a natural or a synthetic product? She said, I think it's synthetic. I said, what are the side effects of it? She said, I don't know. I said, bring me the insert from the box. You know what the first symptom was of side effects?
If I had to guess, I'd say death.
Liver failure.
Right.
That's the first symptom.
Yeah.
I said, okay, look, and there's a list of symptoms, all of which could kill my child. I said, you're sitting here as a health professional trying to encourage me to risk my child's life on a synthetic drug that we never have needed in the history of human beings, when I have a healthy man with a healthy wife and a healthy family? I said, this is absolute criminal, right? And I was very frank with her about how disappointed I was that she didn't take more of a moral and ethical responsibility to the people she's a nurse for. And I also had these kinds of conversations about because they couldn't tell me anything about except that I just had to do it. I'm like, what is with you people? You've got degrees in medicine, but you don't know how to practice medicine. Well, the punchline is the day we were going to leave, two people showed up in suits like government agent types, demanded that I leave the room. It was the Child Health Protective Services. The hospital administrator had gotten wind of me and Angie's viewpoints, turned us into Child Protective Services, and they came to interview Angie to determine if we were fit to be parents, and were considering taking our children from us and putting them in social service, our child. At that time, we just had Mana. And they were also trying to see if I was abusing Angie and forcing her to make these decisions without her consent. And she said, no, absolutely not. I've got a degree in nutrition and blah, blah, blah. Told them her qualifications. Said, we own a health institute. We research this for a living. We know exactly what we're talking about. And there's a reason we're protecting our child from you. So they ended up, not taking our child away and letting us leave, but not without a big, long, drawn-out interview process where essentially we were being treated like criminals and child abusers.
Paul, I've got my next question is quite a long one, so I need to set this one up for you.
Go ahead.
So over the last 3 years, we've seen the biggest valve of deception in our lifetimes, possibly the biggest humanity has ever seen. In the book, Psychology of Totalitarianism, Belgian psychologist Matthias Desmet presents the theory of mass formation, or what others call mass psychosis.
Yes.
He suggests that the majority of people who are deceived by the propaganda are disconnected from their natural and social environment, feel lonely and have a lack of purpose and meaning in life, and suffer anxiety of an unknown cause. Once the narrative was rolled out in 2020, it gave these people a reason to feel anxious, such as dying from the virus, and it gave them a sense of purpose and a strategy to deal with the anxiety, such as the social distancing, the wearing of masks, etc., whether it made sense or not. So Desmet suggests that by taking part in the solution, such as the social distancing, the masking, and taking experimental injections, makes them feel connected again and no longer lonely. What do you think of Desmet's theory of mass formation, and what are your own thoughts on why so many people were not only deceived, but are still unable to accept what they see with their own eyes today, such as the serious harms and deaths caused by the experimental?
Because they're in a trance. The brainwashing has been effective, and it's on 24/7, and they're using technology that very few people are aware of. And I've been warning people of this for a long time. If you study quantum physics and information technology, light has an almost infinite capacity to carry information. You may or may not remember, but many, many years ago, they banned subliminal marketing in movies and on television.
Yeah.
But they didn't stop it. They just got better at it. So now what they're doing is coding messages that act on your psyche. So you think you're just watching a movie or a cartoon or anything on social media, but what you don't know is encoded in that light is all sorts of instructions to make you afraid or to give you the urge to buy or the urge to succumb, etc. I mean, this is extremely advanced technology. Then you have scalar wave technologies. Scalar wave technologies are non-local technologies. Scalar waves are called non-Hertzian electromagnetic waves. A Hertzian electromagnetic wave is what you plug your phone or your vacuum into in the wall. It's anything that moves at or below the speed of light. Non-Hertzian waves are the background of what would be called the zero-point field or the quantum vacuum, which is the energetic substrate or the matrix upon which Hertzian waves emerge. So the bubbling up of energy in the quantum field produces subatomic particles, material formation, light, stars, planets, galaxies, etc. But beneath it is a much, much vaster, much radically more powerful, literally infinite power, and that is the non-local grid. So that would be called the Akashic field in the terms of Ervin Laszlo. That's used for military technology. That's what Tesla was using to transfer electricity wirelessly for free, because there's almost no energy loss in the scalar field. The point is, you have many corporations, and this is not even secret, using scalar wave technologies that broadcast information fields that affect your psyche, that can be broadcast all over the world. And just like you can turn on a radio anywhere pretty much and pick up a signal, they're actually using these information fields to work on your unconscious, to make you afraid of, or to believe in or not believe in. You know, and interestingly, this is a little bit left field for a lot of people, but I'll share it with you because it's true. You know, I'm a remote viewer. I asked my soul to show me, you know, who's behind this and what's really going on. So I went into my remote viewing process, and all of a sudden, I found myself in what looked like a foreign country, because there was guards all over the place with brown skin, maybe Latin or Brazilian, possibly. It was hard for me to tell what country I was in, but they were heavily armed with machine guns, and there was this manhole, and it was like I was in the middle of the forest, but all of a sudden there was this manhole, and it was about 2 or 3 times the size of a normal manhole, maybe 3 or 4 feet across. And so my soul took me down into the manhole, and it was an underground complex of massive proportion. There was tramways in it, just like the military has underground ammunition complexes and underground city, you know, administrative. The whole U.S. government has an underground. Underneath the city of Denver, Colorado, is a massive military industrial complex. Well, I was in this underground complex, and it just went for miles. I mean, there was things, but what I saw was massive computer systems inside rooms that were all under heavy guard, and they were broadcasting scalar information fields from there and programming people to behave the way they wanted them to behave. And so that was extremely irritating to me, because this is secret advanced technology that's actually technically illegal, immoral, unjust. It's basically stealing people's minds. It's pirating people's minds. And so, you know, naturally that disturbed me deeply. Now, these technologies have been being used for a long time, and they're being used on you and me. The difference is, people like you and I have a dream bigger than our crisis, so we have something to live for. We have values. We have an inner compass. So it's very, very hard to use a technology like scalar wave or light technologies to get a guy like Leigh Brandon or Paul Chek to go buy junk food and get, because our compass is oriented towards its North Star. And in order to keep that compass going towards its North Star, it means you got to eat this way or you're not going to arrive. You got to get enough sleep or you're not going to arrive. You got to breathe. You got to move. You got to think for yourself. You got to make sure you got your priorities in line. You got to know what you're doing with your finances, because those are all the ingredients of a life of freedom and happiness, and one that you earn through your own intelligent use of self. So when people don't have a dream orientation, a real goal or objective, or a sense of how to grow themselves into something that's meaningful to them, what do they want to become? They become like a radio that's not tuned to a station and just picks up anything floating in the airways. And so they're like a leaf that blows in any direction, right?
If you're enjoying this episode and want to watch the full unedited version, completely ad-free, head on over to our Patreon channel for a free 7-day trial at www.patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel, where you'll have access to lots of other premium content and exclusive discount offers. Thanks for watching.